I'm Tord Björk, and I will present myself a bit more when I will be introducing the second part of the webinar. I'm active in this Prague Spring 2 network, which is a social forum network that has been working on all issues, more or less, trying to produce détente, to work for peace, but also environmental issues, social justice issues, etc. I've been very impressed by those who have been interested, 120 people who have been interested in this webinar, and I've never seen such a widespread. It's Chisinau, it's Moldavia, with other words, it's Gaza, it's Dingle on Ireland, it's Portugal, Slovakia, etc., etc. So it seems to be a very wide interest about this, and many young people, and many in Central and Eastern Europe. And I think that is good, very good actually. And I told them, Dovid, that we are both very curious about this, as we haven't been trying this before, and we don't really know what the outcome can be, but we thought, in spite of that it was such a short time limit, it would anyway be good to try to start. As it was this occasion, which was that the Swedish state invited Trump, Putin, Merkel, etc., to this huge international Holocaust conference that should have taken place yesterday and today in Malmö in Sweden. And it was the second one after the big first international Holocaust conference in Stockholm, year 2000. But that was postponed, and it was not even replaced by a digital conference. So, with other words, it was the perfect occasion for us to try to do something, and let's see if there can be some kind of continuation. We don't know, but we really appreciate the broad participation. So now I will try, and as you maybe have understood, I'm not the most perfect in knowing exactly what to do, but I will try to see if I can do what I had planned, which is to inaugurate our thing with the song. Yes, here we are.
Von grünem Palmenland bis weit vom weißen Schnee, willkommen alle unser Bein mit unserem Weg. Und wohlgefahren ist das Spitz von unserem Blut, schwarzen Wetter unser Kluge, unser Mut. Und wohlgefahren ist das Spitz von unserem Blut, schwarzen Wetter unser Kluge, unser Mut. Svette Morgensum beginn unserem Heim, und der Neffen wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Und versammeln wird die Sohn und der Kajor, ja, also geht das Leben von Dorf zu Dorf. Und versammeln wird die Sohn und der Kajor, ja, also geht das Leben von Dorf zu Dorf.
Yes, some of these Jewish partisans still live, and this song, the Jewish partisan song, is what is used every Auschwitz Day on the 27th of January. And it shows that people are able to survive under unbelievable circumstances. So now I give the word to Dovid. You have to unmute yourself, Dovid.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me and see me? No?
Yes, we can hear and see you.
Okay. I begin by thanking Claude for inviting me and especially for bringing all of you together by beginning to meet and discuss in a spirit of openness and friendship some of the issues that are perhaps slipping through the cracks of our contemporary dialogue. This will be a happy beginning towards new levels of recognition of certain issues. I have to introduce myself as somebody who's never been a member of any political party, a very non-political person who stumbled into what I regard as the new far right in Eastern Europe. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, the son of a Yiddish poet who was born in Lithuania. My own field has been, is Yiddish linguistics, Yiddish dialectology at university at Columbia in New York, and then later doing my doctorate in London. I was very envious of people studying French and Spanish and German dialects. They could go for a summer to some forsaken village and find the oldest people and tape them. So when the Soviet Union collapsed and I was allowed to visit Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, I discovered that in hundreds of towns there was still one or two Mohicans, as we call them, the last Yiddish-speaking people. Yiddish, of course, being the Germanic and Semitic-derived language of East European Jewry, completely different from modern Hebrew, the language of the State of Israel. One thing led to another, and in 1999 I settled in Vilnius. My late mother never forgave me. It was after a year at Yale in New Haven, academically good year, but the most boring year of my life. And when an opportunity arose to settle in Vilnius and be able to travel every weekend to look for more Mohicans to tape, that's what I did.
Okay.
Okay. I hope everybody can hear, and we begin now a PowerPoint presentation. If I don't finish, I'll be able to send it to anyone interested. Don't worry. I hope to give an introduction. What I learned living in Eastern Europe was that many of the issues of racism, anti-Semitism, and far right are intimately tied up with history. The history of the Second World War, the history of...
What can we do about this music?
To find out where it's coming from and to mute that microphone.
I'm sorry to say it might be Tord that is producing the music.
I don't even have music when I want to, so it can't be from here.
Lord, it looks that it is you.
Me?
Yeah.
Now we don't have the music.
I have no music of any kind on.
Okay, go on speaking because there is no music. I can't hear it now.
Go on.
Okay. Okay. I was saying, and can you all see the first slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay. That racism, anti-Semitism, and far right in Eastern Europe are very much more intellectualized than in the West, and they're related to history. They're related to a conceptualization of the Second World War that differs quite a bit from the Western narrative. To put it bluntly, there are many nationalists in Eastern Europe who are quietly or not so quietly happy that the Nazis, the Holocaust, and Hitler brought their territory more ethnic purity than they had before. That the idea that the Nazis somehow liberated their nations and that all evils were due to the Jewish Bolshevist communist plot. I came across that thousands of times among very nice people who had nothing against me or anyone else personally. This has developed into a new model of history for export to the European Union. Now, at the moment, we are in the middle of a campaign that is going under the radar. Not many people know about it. In the European Union, the European Court of Human Rights, the European Parliament, to equalize Nazism and communism. What does that mean? That it has to be established as a fact that the two are absolutely equal. That the people who liberated Auschwitz on the 27th of January 1945 are morally equal to the people who committed the genocide there. So it's a very problematic concept that has come to be known as double genocide. It started after the three Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, became members of the European Union and NATO in 2004. The various groups and resolutions in the European Parliament beforehand had been completely straightforward and logical to condemn the evils of Stalinism and communism and deportations and lack of freedom. But from this period onward, a new movement developed to proclaim communism and Nazism as equal as the mother of all historic principles. On the 23rd of January 2008, there was the first conference of European parliamentarians composed of East Europeans and their Western fellow travelers, mostly from right-wing parties in the West, but from ostensibly centrist parties in the East, not from the crazy official far right. I want to pay tribute to one parliamentarian in Europe who saw what was going on, John Mann, for many years a member of the British Parliament, recently elevated to the Lords, where we wish him well. He stood up in the House of Commons on the 31st of January 2008 to criticize this conference. He said, as you can see here, on January 22nd in Tallinn, Estonia, 5 MEPs from 5 different countries met to launch a group called Common Europe, Common History. Many of these names are right out of George Orwell. They sound so beautiful. United Europe, United History, Common Europe, Common History. When you examine it, it means if you don't agree with me, then you're some kind of Putinist ally or Putinist dupe. And this is the true history that that Nazism and communism have to be equal. And Mann understood that underneath it was that classic East European kind of anti-Semitism. Now, a few months later, in June 2008, the Prague Declaration was proclaimed by several dozen parliamentarians, and it is not known well enough. The Prague Declaration is the constitution of the double genocide movement. It says that all European minds have to think about communism and fascism as the same. Here is an example of one of its demands, point 17. Adjustment and overhaul of European history textbooks so that children could learn and be warned about communism as its crime in the same way they have been taught to assess the Nazi crime. So to put it in education, we've managed to defeat that proposal till now, but who knows for how long. Right? Then comes this very clever and cunning comparison of victimhood, that victims of communism are entitled to enjoy justice the same as victims of Nazism. That's completely true in one sense. A victim of the same crime or a similar crime is comparable to another victim of that crime. But this was a ruse to say that deporting a small percentage of the population of a country, that the victims of that deportation are equal to the victims of a genocide where everybody in a certain group or groups indeed were murdered. So it is the equalization of the obviously non-equivalent, but in such beautiful language that people hardly notice. Okay. Another proposal would be the de facto replacement of Holocaust Remembrance Day with August 23rd. Now, August 23rd commemorates the date of the Nazi-Soviet Pact, the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact of August 23rd, 1939. Indeed, a low point in modern history, a disgraceful document, a disgraceful carving up and destruction of Poland. But again, not the same. With the western part was ceded to Hitler, who began his genocide immediately, and the eastern part became part of the Soviet Union, where people enjoyed or suffered the same as other Soviet citizens throughout the Soviet Union. So to take this day as a symbol of remembrance is to take equivalence of Nazi and Soviet crimes as the point of departure for a new revisionist history. It's been accepted by the United States Congress, by the Canadian Parliament, and by all sorts of human rights organizations who don't understand the far-right revisionist basis of making a day of mix and match for the victims of Nazism and communism. So who is driving it? It's not only the Baltic states, but it's the Baltic states above anyone else. The three Baltic states have become successful democracies in the years since the Soviet Union collapsed. I personally, who have been living 21 years in Vilnius, Lithuania, have come to love the Lithuanian people. I am not anti-Lithuanian. My disagreement with the nationalist and ultranationalist history revisionism has nothing to do with everyday life. I've been treated very well in everyday life, as you can see from my voice and appearance and all the rest. I'm a Jewish guy from Brooklyn, New York. So this isn't against the Baltics. It is to point out that because they became successful members of the EU and NATO, the Baltics have been able to push this narrative a lot further than, for example, the far right in Ukraine, especially in Western Ukraine. Okay, so double genocide is a way to fix not only the differences between Nazism and communism in their eyes, yes, to say that communism is just as bad or is worse because it's the real villain. It was also a way for these countries to deny their historical collaboration in the Holocaust. Now, nobody holds it against today's Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, or Western Ukrainians, of course. But in these four countries, the rate of murder of the Jewish civilian population was the highest in Europe, between 95 and 99%. And it was between 95 and 98 to 99% in the three Baltic countries. And to make matters worse, many of the collaborators are today heroes in these countries because they're considered anti-Soviet heroes. And indeed, the murderers, the perpetrators of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe were all anti-Soviet. They dreamt of a Hitler victory during the years when the Soviet Union was the only force fighting Hitler between June 1941 and the end of the war. This fits into another issue, that of Holocaust denial. 20th century Holocaust denial was a different kind of far-right theory that said it never happened. It was made up by the Jews and the liberals and others. 21st century Holocaust denial has morphed into Holocaust obfuscation. Let's confuse the issue. Let's show that everything is equal. Everything was the same. Everybody was killing everybody. In Lithuania alone, there are these 4 institutions lavishly sponsored by the state that enable this history revisionism to proceed. I don't have time now to go through them. That's a typical window of the Genocide Center's bookstore that would typically have several dozen books about supposed Soviet genocide and 1 or 2 books about the Holocaust that are very far from accurate. Many of the exhibits in the main museum have quotes like, this was a visiting exhibit from Ukraine a few years ago. In Auschwitz, we were given some spinach and a little bread. War is terrible, but famine is worse. Okay, and this is the lady who supposedly said it. In the corridor of the museum, you have a complicated chart that tries to prove that 200,000 Jews were killed in the Holocaust, yes, and that there were 200,000 Lithuanian victims of Soviet crime. Now, these victims include not necessarily people killed. It includes people deprived of employment because of the communist system, people sent to prison, people sent to Siberia. It includes communist rule over almost half a century. It's comparing 2 very different things to make a fancy table where everything ends up the same. In 2006, a new phase in the campaign started where Lithuanian prosecutors, and this was only in Lithuania, started to press criminal charges against Holocaust survivors who were alive because they joined the anti-Nazi resistance. And that was the Soviet partisans in the forest. You just heard at the start the anthem of the Jewish partisans, Zog nit kein molas du gehst dem letzten Weg, never say you're going the last way, by Hirsch Glick, a young Yiddish poet and Jewish partisan who himself perished in 1944. So Hirsch Glick's comrades were starting to be prosecuted for war crimes. What war crimes? The prosecutors started reading the memoirs of Holocaust survivors to find, and they found out that in the forests of Lithuania and Belarus, there were no courts, there were no prisons. If a high Nazi official was captured, he was killed. They knew all that, but it was an attempt to confuse the matter and turn the victim into the perpetrator. In 2000, the first victim was Yitzhak Arad, who had been head of Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Museum, for 2 decades. He was accused of war crime. And then in 2008, 2 elderly women, both dear friends of mine, Fania Bransovsky, who's now 98, and Rochel Margolis, who passed away in 2015 in her early 90s, police came looking for both Vilna Ghetto survivors with charges that they participated in war crimes. And that's when I understood I can no longer remain silent. I can no longer be the happy Yiddish professor who is oblivious to all this. These were 2 of my best friends. And indeed, this was the voice of the last generation of Yiddish speakers. That year, 2008, legal devices began to be used. For example, in June, the Lithuanian parliament passed an equal ban on Nazi and Soviet symbols. You see here the BBC cover, it said Lithuanian ban on Soviet symbols, being the news, but the law bans both equally. Now, the only people using Nazi symbols were the far right in their fascist parades. Who was using Soviet symbols in 2008? I'll tell you who. 80 and 90-year-old veterans, many of them Jewish and from many different peoples and ethnicities, who were veterans of the Soviet army who fought against Hitler and who cherished dressing up in their old uniforms on May 9th every year to celebrate Victory Day. So they were suddenly no longer allowed to put on these uniforms. 2 years later, the Lithuanian courts made an exception for one symbol, the swastika, that it said was not a fascist symbol, but is an ancient Baltic symbol of the sun and happiness. Again, these are elites behind all this, the courts, judges, academics, politicians, people in historical institutes, not the everyday people of Lithuania who just want a better life. The same year, the then president of Lithuania, Adamkus, issued a statement that he forgives Germany for the Nazi occupation, meaning that he doesn't forgive the Soviets, that behind the so-called equality is really a new politics of the Soviets having been the committers of genocide during World War II. During the ensuing debate in America, the Lithuanian ambassador in Washington put it all together. Nazi collaborators, Soviet partisans, KGB interrogators, etc. All those who committed crimes. So suddenly, the Nazis and their collaborators are equal to those who fought against them. At the same time, the press went ahead with a very primitive anti-Semitic and anti-gay, anti-LGBT campaign. This cartoon appeared on page 1 of the so-called mainstream daily Respublika, and it appeared many times. The Jew and the gay, depicted as in the imagination of the far right, controlling, holding up the world. Okay. Then the movement turned to the definition of genocide. The definition of genocide had to be changed if the world will accept that Soviet and Nazi crimes were equal and that there was no separate Holocaust or genocide. It was all part of the evil of the period. And here I have to be very honest. The definition of genocide was troubled from the very start. The word was coined by Raphael Lemkin in his preface to his 1944 book, Axis Rule. The preface is, by the way, dated, I think, to December 1943, where he has a very clear, what I would say, brilliant definition of his new term, genocide. Destruction of a nation or of an ethnic group. But in the following paragraphs, he goes into a long discussion that genocide could, in his view, be much wider, killing members of the group, but also causing bodily or mental harm to members of the group. He has a lot more there. I'm in haste offering one example. In other words, the guy who brilliantly invented the word genocide also laid the seeds for it to be expanded so much that it can mean anything and therefore nothing. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, many of these countries issued new definitions. But the difference is, these were not definitions like Lemkin's definition in his book. These were laws that stipulated if you don't agree, you can be punished. Lithuania in 1992 passed a law saying that including the deportation of Lithuanian inhabitants committed during the occupation as being genocide. Okay? So deportation is genocide, even if it's a small percentage of the population, even if some of them came back, even if some of them were criminals or war criminals. In Latvia in 1998, the law stressed that it includes causing people to become mentally ill. So if the government caused me and my friends to become mentally ill by depriving us all of employment and writing articles against us or whatever, they have committed genocide. Estonia in 1994 went further to including the deprivation of economic, social, or political rights, or even just restricting those rights as genocide. So the three Baltic states led the way in passing laws redefining genocide as all evils that governments can commit. In these countries and others, penalties were imposed for disagreeing. In Hungary was the first. Lithuania discussed, the Lithuanian parliament discussed such laws in 2008 and 9, but they didn't dare pass it until Hungary did, when the new Fidesz government came to power in the spring of 2010. Within a month to 6 weeks, Lithuania passed its version with only 2 years of imprisonment maximum threatened, as opposed to Hungary's 3. Estonia followed in 2012 with a very unclear law that's called the Valentine's Day law in the field because it was published on Valentine's Day that year. Latvia in 2014 came up with a version that threatens 15 years maximum, and Ukraine in 2015 maxing out at 10 years. Only the Ukrainian law was widely or criticized at all in mainstream Western publications. For the rest, it's been taboo to mention such things because an atmosphere, an anti-free speech atmosphere, in my view, has been created where anybody who brings this up is called some kind of Putinist agent who's helping the Russians defame the free states of Eastern Europe, and it doesn't matter how many times you protest that you hate Stalinism, you hate Putin and Putinism, and so on. In other words, debate is stifled. In more recent years, this has come up in the European Court of Human Rights, which I'm using a Yiddish word here. I can't give a talk without teaching one Yiddish word. You may recognize it from other Germanic languages. A Nókhshleper, someone who goes along with something without critically analyzing it. The European Court of Human Rights has become a sort of Nókhshleper to the East European double genocide movement in 2 recent rulings in 2015 and 2019. In both cases, a Lithuanian former member of the KGB who participated in torture or killing of prisoners in the 1950s was put on trial for their crimes. Now, had they been convicted of that particular crime of torturing and killing an innocent person, then that would have simply been a case of a court trying someone and finding them guilty. But the court found them guilty of genocide. Why? Because the persons they killed were members of the Forest Brothers' post-war resistance to the Soviet government. Not all of the Forest Brothers, quite a few were recycled Holocaust perpetrators, others were completely honest resistors to Soviet rule. The second European Court of Human Rights decision, Drellingas versus Lithuania, March 2019, is particularly instructive because the person killed was an alleged Holocaust perpetrator himself. When the Lithuanian embassy in the United States tried to erect a statue in this guy's memory in the Connecticut town of New Britain, Connecticut, 2 years ago, the town council democratically voted it down. They didn't want a statue of an alleged Holocaust collaborator on public land in New Britain, Connecticut. And oblivious to all this, the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that the KGB people who captured that guy and killed him in the 50s are guilty of genocide. So genocide has been turned not exactly on its head, but not very far degrees from it. So the new policy is not to deny a single death, that yes, the Nazis killed another 20,000, no problem, but we will find you another 20,000 the Soviets killed. That's the kind of kindergarten tit-for-tat mentality now. Second, redefine genocide legally. Third, raise Soviet crimes to the level of genocide. Fourth, explain locally in museums that the Soviet genocide, as it's called, was the only one. And here's where racism and anti-Semitism come in. Stress that it was Jews, and not only Jews, but if you're in the Baltic countries, stress that it was Jews, Russians, Poles, and Belarusians who were involved with all this. Characterize the murderers as anti-Soviet heroes. As I said earlier, all of the murderers in Eastern Europe were ipso facto anti-Soviet. Delegitimize efforts to bring Nazi war criminals to justice as some kind of Jewish conspiracy. That's largely about the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the dedicated work of Ephraim Zurf and others over many decades. 8, always stress the Jewish component in the Soviet anti-Nazi partisan movement. As I mentioned, in 2006 to 2009, Lithuanian prosecutors started their campaign to try to prosecute veterans of the Soviet partisans. The then inspirational leader of the Jewish community, Simon Alperovich of blessed memory, issued a statement saying, wait a minute, how come you're only looking for Soviet partisans with Jewish-sounding surnames? The majority were not Jewish, but they were ignored. So this kind of anti-Semitism came out, that they're after Soviet partisans who were Jewish, even if they were Holocaust survivors who escaped the Vilna ghetto and who were the only members of their families to escape and then join the anti-Nazi movement, yes, in partnership with the Soviet Union in the years when the Soviet Union was the ally of the United States and Britain in the alliance that brought Hitler down. 9, as a cover, a number of these governments and their institutions invest handsomely in Jewish klezmer concerts and Yiddish projects. Perhaps they tried to disrupt our meeting by piping in klezmer music as I was getting started, but that's rather paranoid, so I withdraw that. Okay? Foreign Jewish personalities from big American and Israeli Jewish organizations are given medals and honors in a number of East European countries to just shut up about the history issues. The American Jewish Committee is probably the worst. The head of its Foreign Affairs Division has either 2 or 3 medals from the Lithuanian government for betraying the true history of the Holocaust and covering for current anti-Semitism. In the meantime, that is covered from the other side by letting local anti-Semitism run rampant. Finally, and in a way the most dangerous factor in all of this, is free dialogue has been canceled out by the new Cold War, as Edward Lucas called it in his book on this subject. Use the revised World War II narrative in the arsenal of argumentation against Putin's authoritarian and revanchist regime. So, Putin can be wrong about 150 things, but if Putin talks about the anti-Nazi alliance, in that one case, the Russians are today giving the same history as the Western history. But if you disagree with double genocide, you are immediately labeled an agent of Russia and become unemployable in a number of East European countries. As I said before, even if you've never had anything to do with communists or Putin or Russia, okay? And then disseminate locally a particular variety of post-Holocaust anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, comes from the far right, not from the far left. It has been completely non-violent so far, and I'll try to share with you very quickly its most salient aspect. I'll simply quote what I've heard hundreds of times. Dovid, we love you. We love American Jews. We love British Jews. We love Israelis. We hate the local Jews because they have in their head the communist idea that our heroes helped murder their families and that they're alive because the Soviet Union prevailed and saved them from the Nazis. That's why we can't wait till the last local Jews disappear. Okay, and marginalize the non-Jewish intellectuals who disagree. So many wonderful Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Ukrainians, and in other countries to a lesser but noticeable extent, sometimes Hungary in certain sectors in Poland and Romania, have lost their positions and have become the victims of defamation, character assassination, campaigns of personal destruction when they've spoken out. So strangely enough, history has become the most sensitive and explosive element in debates on human rights and free speech. Then 16, to export the new model and to say, what do you want? We have so many Jews who come here and love it. They're with us. And that brings me to the end of the PowerPoint, and I'll be delighted at any point to answer your questions. And thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much, Dovid. There were a lot of very interesting things here. I simply give, the floor is yours. Anyone, any questions, any comments? You can
Feel free to disagree.
Yeah, you heard, you're free to disagree. Yes, Urban, please. Yes.
I see Mr. Schneider is raising his hand.
Yeah, please, Schneider.
Okay, I was very impressed because of your intervention and also the material you added. I only want to add one aspect of the double genocide thematic. The European Parliament decided in September last year a scandalous decision in which exactly the identification of Nazi crimes and communism tried to be established. It is not 10 years ago, it is actually political situation, and this scandalous declaration was supported by about 3/4 of the member of the parliament. And that is a scandal, I think, not only because of the position of the Baltic and the Polish and other countries, but the majority of the parliament accepted this. And this is, I think, a very problematic decision. Thanks.
Right. Can I say something now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you so much. The 2019 resolution you mentioned is one of the many things I didn't mention today. You're absolutely right. It is one of the direct outcomes of the 2008 Prague Declaration, moving forward what is called the Prague process in Eurospeak. And there's a big European Union, in other words, financed by our tax money or your tax money, institution in Prague called the Prague Platform for European Conscience and Memory. And it indeed makes all kinds of conferences to spread this. So part of the problem is that many good people don't understand what this is all about. when you present equality of victimhood and equality of murders, and it sounds so good. I can give an example. I was honored to be the co-author of the 70 Years Declaration with my colleague and friend, Professor Danny Ben Moshe of Melbourne, Australia. In 2012, we quickly got as many parliamentarians as signed the Prague Declaration to sign our declaration. And when I was in Brussels, among the many people I was honored to meet was Edward Macmillan Smith, then a vice president of the European Parliament. He signed our declaration immediately, and then over a whiskey, he says to me, "You know, Dovid, I think I signed one of their statements a few years ago. It sounded so good." And then I said to him, "Why did you sign?" And he said, "Well, they brought out a young Jewish parliamentarian from Lithuania who began to weep and explained that his mother was in the Kovna ghetto and that his mother told him that the Soviets were worse than the Nazis. So I signed. I thought it is the consensus now of the Jews or of the minorities of East." So first you have that element, the ignorant element that can usually be put right if we had an office and a budget and professional PR people, not a few Don Quixotes or Dovid Quixotes scattered in European capitals. Secondly, another very important factor, in my opinion, the American neoconservative base in the U.S. State Department, with its partners in the British and other foreign ministries, has made a certain decision, and to make it quick, I will simply tell it to you as friends from these embassies in Vilnius told it to me off the record. Okay, Dovid, let me tell it to you off the record. When it comes to a war, the English and the British and the French and the Spanish, they're not going to fight against Putin. Only the East Europeans are going to fight. And if they want a couple of changes in the history that doesn't affect anyone today, we are going to let them have it. We're going to protect them from the propaganda that they're really affected by fascist thinking. So the neoconservative element in Western security services has sadly been very complicit. And I was shocked to see in the American embassy in Vilnius that things got a lot worse in 2010 when I expected them to go the other way after the election of 2008. So you never know. It is a complicated issue. But I think if someone here today can think of new ways to bring this out into the mainstream media, how the European Parliament is accepting resolutions that have a deep, far-right and ipso facto racist, anti-Semitic, Holocaust revisionist element in them, it would be a huge achievement to break through this media blackout.
Very many things in what you address, Dovid, and to me, although I've been following your fantastic website, Defending History, for very many years now, this character assassination, this stopping any possible career within some profession you are interested in. That's really interesting because we see that in Sweden now, but it's not related to this, but in general, anyone that somehow questions that we should become member of NATO, which is mainstream policy some years ago, that is, very, very much criticized, and people get very silent. And this, I would say, is one of the reasons why this issue is very important for young people. Because I can guess that they can sense that it's problematic today to be too much system critical if you confront things. And at the same time, that is maybe the opening here as well. Because I'm a sort of environmentalist, and they've been attacking, a lot of people have been attacking me personally, But as I'm an environmentalist, it doesn't work on it really. But I see it, and I don't understand why not more popular movements and progressive parties don't understand that they are committing political suicide if they don't address this issue. And we saw it in horrible proportions in UK, with this false claims against the Labour under Corbyn. I've been reading a whole book, statistics about it. There was absolutely no more anti-Semitism in Labour under Corbyn before in that period, and certainly not compared to other parties. So it was a real fake, enormous thing going on. And this seems to happen to anyone that sort of stand up clearly for peace. So it's really an issue. And I'm an environmentalist, so I'm not really, I've never been a left, I've never been in a left group, but I can't understand why they don't defend themselves, because I've been trying now to publish these texts about the Jewish partisans, your text on double genocide, and they're sort of disinterested. And I can't understand this disinterest. And that's why I was so very impressed that there were several young people interested in this webinar. We were a little bit late sending out. I was too worried about maybe the security issue, because I was in a Zoom meeting some weeks ago and suddenly it was destroyed by somebody from outside. But c'est la vie. But I wonder about the young people here. Did you know about this widespread character assassination of people that sort of stand up? And is that a general problem, actually? Okay, Leo, you want to speak? Unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. For me, it was what I, although being a little late, but I got the message. And what I'm wondering is whether a scientific discussion would not eliminate from beforehand this thing with genocide of the Soviets. Because I'm not a historian, and I know probably only 1% of what you know about this particular period. But I'm a social anthropologist, and we have in anthropology, we have the term genocide is quite well defined. It refers to the people. There might be a little difficulty always with the English language, because people, and you don't make the difference so much peoples and the people on the street and so on. In other languages, you have a clear distinction between the Volk in German, Pueblo in Spanish, and people, and so on. And genocide, according to all authors who used it, and I think even in international law, is defined of the persecution of persons, of people in the general sense, because they belong to a specific culture they identify with, like, for instance, the Jews. And I don't understand how can you apply this term to perhaps normal quote unquote war crimes which have been perpetrated by everybody, by the Americans, by British, by Germans, of course, but and so on. So I would like to ask you, why don't you stick, or wouldn't be a good idea to stick to the real term and in its scientific denomination of what genocide means? It's not ethnocide is, for instance, another expression, but that refers to the killing of cultures and not the killing of people. You can exterminate, like, I don't know, in Latin America, you persecuted certain indigenous cultures, not necessarily by killing them, but by prohibiting them to speak their language and so on. That is ethnocide. So there is a clear definition of this, and I think if you approach the thing not from a political standpoint, that you're right or left or whatever, but quite simply from a scientific approach, I think you could cut out a lot of these arguments as simply non-scientific and non-reasonable.
Right. Shall I answer, Tord, or would you like to?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Leo. That was very, very important. And it's something that we've had to confront every day. Well, in my own academic work, I have followed your advice completely when I've written on the topic. In 2009, I published my first paper in the field called On 3 Definitions, and one of the 3 was genocide, where I made it clear genocide is genocide. What I didn't understand then was that academic clarity and simplicity and the elegance of simple thought can be damaged, firstly, by the existing academic literature seeing it differently, and that goes back to Raphael Lemkin's own muddying, if he will forgive me wherever he is, of the definition in the paragraphs following his introduction of the term, an expansion, an inflation, as the late Lithuanian philosopher Leonidas Donskis called it, of genocide, that we see even in the 1948 United Nations definition. The minute you start saying to prevent a group from surviving in the sense of its future generations, you start talking about things other than the murder of all members of the group, because they are members of the group, in a circumstance where you cannot save yourself by saying, I renounce something, as you can if you're being murdered for a religious, political reason. So in genocide, there is an obvious way to recapture it. But now, what am I going to say when it's pointed out to me that all of these democratic countries, proud members of the European Union and NATO, have passed laws defining it very differently than my definition, Leo's definition, and the obvious definition, and that only last year the European Parliament twice in different ways confirmed the twisted, new, inflated definition. One, in the aforementioned resolution on history, and 2, in the court cases brought by Lithuanian citizens accused of genocide for having been former KGB agents. So we're back to square one. And we have, if we leave the academic and we come to the political and the financial. One, these small countries, poor, not enough money for their own citizens, decide to sink a few million a year into such things when no one anywhere else in the world is investing anything to counter them, they can get very far. And two, when these things get tied up in geopolitics and you get young American, British, Canadian, French, Israeli, and other diplomats talking about what a small price this is to pay to have these guys in our corner, we understand what we're up against. So we are in complete agreement. The question is what to do.
I have a suggestion now. We had some problems because of this music in the beginning, but it's already 18:05. My introduction will fit very well to what Dovid had brought up, and bring it also very much into the sphere of how enormously broad this campaign is in media and everywhere, and some specific points in how this new rewriting of history is organized and how it is done. And that could be a good contribution before we have a final debate, sort of. So my proposal is that we take 5 minutes break, and then we make this introduction, and then we take a final discussion. Okay? My contribution now is an attempt for our final session to bring this a bit together and showing how what Dovid has very deeply and very precisely shown is at the core of a very manipulative way of presenting history. And now I will try to show how this actually have very wide consequences, and is strongly supported also in the West with a lot of resources. And to this end, I've been preparing myself, and now let's see if I'm able to share screen. Why is it not there? There it is. Yes, there it is. Yeah. So now I will share this. Yeah. Now I guess you can see it. Is that so? Can you see relativization of the Holocaust and the rewriting of history?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. This is the summary of what I will talk about. It is a general experience that if one really wants to find out what to do about an issue, there are 5 questions to put. One is when and where. That's normally said to be one issue. Where in time and space is actually a process going on. Secondly, what is it? What is going on? Thirdly, who is the actor? 4 is how this is practically, more directly, technically organized. And finally, of course, the worst and most important question, why? A question which is normally possible to answer when you really have understood the other issues. And why it's important to wait with an answer on the question of why is to not run into too fast conclusions. And it's often useful to maintain an understanding that not everything is necessarily intentional, although it may look like that afterwards. So why is it so important to oppose this new rewriting of history and the relativization of the Holocaust? This I will do very general, of course, and run through it and maybe add only on some specific point. Humanity is faced with urgent threats against our survival. We really are in need of cooperation instead of creating enemy images. And this, more or less everyone who is involved and cares about what is going on in the world are really facing this, whether it's on environment or social issues or peace issues. I also think that obfuscation of the Holocaust is helping anti-Semitism. I think Dovid made that clear. But somehow also the re-emergence of Nazism. And that came also quite clear of what Dovid presented to us. But also racism in general, because of the simple reason is that certain periods and certain kind of issues are especially important in general. That's why the World War, Second World War, for instance, is very fundamental to the political understanding. Not only in Europe, it's actually, it was a world war. And the same thing with anti-Semitism. It's important for racism in general. If we are not able to understand how anti-Semitism, the need of standing up against anti-Semitism and understanding the ways this anti-Semitism is done in new ways, then we are not capable of addressing other kind of racism either. So then comes next point, separating Nazism into racist and anti-communist parts weakens the anti-racist struggle and social struggles, strengthens liberal and right-wing hegemony. This is my problem with the left. I think they separate Nazism. Nazism was against Jude-Bolshevism. It was not two separate ideologies. It was the same ideology. For practical, pragmatic reasons, of course, it's sometimes necessary to be very narrow anti-racist. But we can never leave the anti-Nazi issue to those who see anti-Nazism only as a racist issue, and so on. And finally, the most important, separating global history from European history. That is a real threat for the future. That means that we cut out humanity. And this is at the core of why this is so important also for the environmental movement. Yeah, well, of course, it's very important. For some reason, the corporate interests are very strong on this issue right now. Of course, it's important for Jews and all concerns about anti-Semitism, but also for racism. But then, of course, peace and environmental movement as well. Now, how did this develop? Here you can see that the Swedish government has been very active on this issue. It initiated the first huge international Holocaust conference in year 2000. And in 2005, it started with this double genocide kind of imagery by appointing a state authority to write history. I will go a little bit more in detail into that. In 2006, EPP, that's European People's Party, that's the Conservatives and Christian Democrats, they started this big campaign against communism in the Council of Europe. And then 2008, then where it's really started with this campaign against the Jewish partisans, the Prague Declaration, and the starting of this Remembrance Day for victims of Stalinism and Nazism. Here you can see, I hope you see, there is a picture of Joseph Melmer, I don't know if I say him correctly here. That's my most fantastic demonstration I ever have seen a picture from. A dozen, many survivors of the Holocaust protested at the Tel Aviv airport against the Lithuanian foreign minister who came to Israel in this very odd situation where you oppress the memory of the Holocaust in Lithuania, but you say yes to the Israeli government policy. And this is why it is sort of accepted. And he was personally accused for the crime of offending Nazi collaborators because they were national heroes. It's a sort of unbelievable kind of things going on. This is the symbol on the Wikipedia for the European Day of Remembrance for Victims of Stalinism. It's clearly stated Wikipedia. This is EU supported, but this is not the official symbol. They just put it there anyway, but it's very typical for the whole thing. It goes on like that all the time. Then in 2015, it was the 70-year anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and the Polish government made it clear to Putin that he was not welcome, which meant that the whole historic unity against anti-Semitism was destroyed. This is a very important part of the world. And here you have the House of European History, cost 50 million euro. And there you see exactly the same thing again, the swastika and the hammer and the scissor. And then this European Parliament resolution we already talked about. And today it should actually be in the second International Holocaust Conference, but it didn't take place because of the corona, and it didn't even take place a digital alternative. So which are the methods used? It's very much on a visual level, visual imagery. What they first do is to separate Nazi ideology and saying that there's one part is racist and the other one is anti-working class. As if Nazis actually did separate them. They never did. They planned a killing of 30 million Soviet citizens as a way to destroy the Soviet state forever, as the Soviet state was against a kind of organic idea of society. And they wanted to exterminate all Jews because they also was a threat to this organic German race, sort of. And these are indivisible. But what is happening is that it's all divided. Secondly, they put this anti-working class, the anti-communist part, and proclaim it similar to Nazism. And then it's not long until they also say that communist and Nazi symbols are actually exactly the same. And finally, the Nazi symbols and Russia are also the same. So it's a sort of four-step process. Then they repeat these kind of messages, not only in illustrations, but also in text, continuously, and we see it more and more. And by this repetition, in all media, in news, in academic papers, you name it, or political statements and so on. And then they have the double standard. They erase the liberal regime crimes, whether the historic or the current ones. The oppression of the rest of the world is eliminated. Maybe they can accept that you had a lot about colonialism, but that was, you know, old time. Now we left colonialism, so that is not a problem anymore. As if neo-colonial relations cannot be as dangerous as the ones. Here you see how this works. This is the first one here, is from a Nazi exhibition, huge exhibition in Nuremberg in 1938. They took a lot from Italy. The first big, this kind of exhibition was held in Italy in 1932, I think. And you can see here is unfortunately not very sharp, but here you see the hammer and the scissor inside the David star. So this is a very clearly showing that actually the attack against the Jews and the attack against communism is exactly the same. They are not separate ideologies. Anti-Jude-Bolshevismus, as they say. So this is 1931, and down here you have some examples from this exhibition. One of them was that the Nazis were against colonial Bolshevism, because this colonial Bolshevism was threatening the resources of that was, of course, a sort of self-evidently European ownership of all resources on Earth, which was sabotaged by these Bolsheviks. And here is a picture of Czechoslovakia as a sort of aircraft carrier in the attacking Germany, and that is, of course, why it was necessary to destroy Czechoslovakia, because it was actually Stalin country. So this is from 1938, where primarily that communism and Jewish is exactly the same. Here we have the Brussels Museum, House of European History, and here communism and Nazism is almost the same. They are claimed to be a bit different, but they are doing the same kind of evil things. And then finally, Dovid Katz's favorite Prague Declaration. And here we are back again. Communism and Nazism is exactly the same. There is no difference whatsoever. And finally, we have Billy Browder here on in an action in Canada, and here you see also Russia is exactly the same as Nazism. We are sort of the circle, which shows that this is not something of the past. It is used today, this kind of obfuscation of things. Here is the Swedish moderate politician who was the leader of the whole European People's Party when they started this anti-communist campaigning, and also the chairman of the EU-sponsored platform of European Memory and Consciousness for very many years, and that is this institution that is sort of supporting this Prague Declaration. As a small exception, here is a German exhibition on the Wehrmacht, and that was completely different from all these others, very strictly focused on avoiding imagery manipulation, being very strictly, these are orders, army orders to kill Jews and kill communists. They had pictures, but they explained first very much the general thematic and chronological order. So it was an exemplary exhibition in 1995. So it's fully possible to do this thing in a very professional way. And I, as a teacher in exhibition design, has sort of been I was involved in this kind of exhibition, found that very useful. Now we have an example. This is the Swedish exhibition about the excavation of Baltic soldiers from the SS divisions in Latvia and Estonia, and police, Lithuanian police troops. Both these were involved in the Holocaust. Whether the specific individual member here were, that we don't know. Here you see pictures from the German concentration camps. So these are victims of German horrors and Holocaust. At the entrance, outside of the pictures, were also similar victims carried by Swedish police of the Baltic SS regiments. So the Baltic SS soldiers were presented as somehow equal victims to something horrible as the Jews in the concentration camps. And of course, the Second World War, this whole room was about the Second World War, was started by, if you look at the pictures, it was started by aggressive Soviet soldiers. And actually it was, of course, true in some sense, because this is a picture from Finland where Soviet attacked. But anyway, the visual imagery is actually that it's Soviet Union who attacks and starts the Second World War. Here are maps, two of them. Both are false. They exclude the Finnish occupation of East Karelia, where half of the Russian population were put into concentration camps and 1/4 died. And they exclude the liberation of Norway, northern Norway and eastern Austria, because they were it's stated by the Swedish Prime Minister, where the Red Soldier put his foot, the Iron Curtain was established. But that is a false, because as we know, these countries were given back their land. So it's two false maps, and when it was criticized, they didn't change it. They took away the pictures, of course, of that was a bit too much, but they didn't change the maps. And here you have the typical again, the swastika and the hammer and sister, and on the floor you can stamp on Hitler and Stalin, very useful. No, that's the wrong. Why doesn't go forward? There you go. This is the House of European History. It costs 50 million euro. And here you have exactly the same kind of imagery. You present, you know, the Nazi and the communist symbols as equally genocidal. It's specifically also in the text. It's presented as actually Soviet communist is genocidal. It's not only in the German. They say in the text that there are ideological differences, but the general atmosphere and the general visual is that they are the same. And they are supposed, of course, to rewrite history books, and these are actually how exactly well this European Parliament resolution is not only a resolution, it's actually a huge project going on by the EU in this direction. So how can we challenge this? Firstly, put European history into a global context. This is the only way I can see that we actually finally can make a common history, where we can acknowledge all histories in different parts of Europe. We should not relativize Holocaust as not unique during the World War II era. This, I think, is a big mistake when but there were other genocides as well. Yes, there was before, and there's been horrors long after. But during this era, it's not comparable. The other terror is not comparable to the Holocaust. Bring the struggle against antisemitism and racism back into the struggle against Nazism, inseparable from social struggles. We cannot longer accept that Nazism is presented as the worst kind of racism ever in history, excluding that it also was ideology and practice to destroy the results of the global popular revolutions that took everywhere. In Europe, it started actually by peasants in Ukraine in 1902. We had it in Mexico, we had it in India, etc. These are global revolutions, and then somehow develops different in different countries. But to separate and claim that the result of some of these revolutions are demonized while the rest of the world is whitewash is really destroying for all the popular movements. Put people history at the center and not state history. Trump have recently said that we have to attack Howard Zinn and his vision, his books, which has been much used in the schools in the United States, talking about the people's history. And it's interesting because Trump is here exactly doing the same as the European Union. And here we have a possibility to show a split in how these issues are, because everybody in Europe says, oh, he's horrible, or at least many. Trump is horrible, but they are doing exactly the same in this kind of patriotic way of explaining that the Western European states are the liberators of the rest of the world and having European values which they don't understand in other places. Then we have to also criticize business are very much wrong, but also all states in the same way, with the same, not using double standards. There are, which was promoted by Boris Kagarlitsky at the No to NATO meeting in Brussels last year, saying that not even during Tsarist times would the Russian leaders say that the conflict between Russia and Western Europe was a conflict between Orthodox Christianity and other kind of values. But now it is. And he said this is a sort of course, a joke, as well as the whole idea that Russia or Soviet Union is eternally expansionist. This is also a joke or a false kind of enemy images that has to be opposed. So we have to build opposition to the new Cold War manipulation of history and double genocide theory, and finally try to contribute to write history together, building on experience exchange from different countries and movements. So across these conflict lines. It has been done sometimes, actually, that one starts to write history books between Poland and Germany. It has been done, for instance. Okay, and the final, of course. These are the Jewish partisans. This is Sarah Ginaiti. I hope I'm correct, Dovid. When she liberates Vilnius in 1944, I suppose. And these are the 5 Jewish partisans that have been accused in different kinds of criminal investigations. It's not only so that they have in common that they are Jewish partisans, but it's also all of them have done much to contribute to the knowledge of Lithuanian participation in the Holocaust. And that makes this so horrible. And I think this makes it also a history that is not only a political issue, it's a very human history. Fantastically, some of them have survived, as far as I understood. This started in 2008. Are 3 still alive, Dovid, or how many are still alive?
Oh, sorry, only Yitzhak Arad and Fania Bransovsky are still alive.
Oh, they are still alive. That's fantastic. I mean,
Yes,
they're so old.
Yes.
They're long over 90.
Yes.
Okay, that was it. So now I have to stop this sharing somehow. There we have.
Oh, well done.
Well, I hope that was maybe a lot, but maybe this story, which Dovid had been fighting in very hard conditions. I know that this, for sometimes you were saved in the last minute economically, etc. But you have done a very, very enormous work, and now we need others to join as well. And we need to understand that this is of interest for everyone. This is not a question for Jews or for anti-racists. This is a threat against everyone who wants that the humanity survives. Okay, that was a lot of big words, but to anyone, okay. Did you, please?
Yes. I want to add another aspect of this topic, saying that you don't need the Jews in order to be anti-Semitic. In our capital city, according to my estimation, about 20% of the population is Jewish. By historical reason, it is not measured. And even the Jewish minority is saying that this should not be measured. So every 10 years, when the Hungarian Statistical Institute is making a similar measurement, they are asking them not to ask the question who is Jewish and who is not, who is belonging to which minority. This is because it happened that before the Second World War, there were measurements also to the German population and also to the Jewish population. and the ending we all know. So that is why they are against this measurement. But in the villages, they almost made it complete. In the countryside, 525,000 Jews were executed. They almost all of them ended in Auschwitz. And this was a very sad story. But in the countryside, you can find more anti-Semitism than in the capital. But it happens also in the capital. First of all, it happened with a friend of mine 2 weeks ago. He told me the story that he was traveling home on a bus during the late night hours, and two young people talked to each other loudly, saying, "Look, the old man, he's a Jew." And nobody from the passengers was brave enough to say that what type of talking we are listening to. And then they started to comment it several times, and then he thought it's better if he will get off the bus. So he got off the bus and walked home, and became very nervous. This can happen, that you can find giant posters all around the town during the previous election with the picture of Soros. I'm speaking about the Hungarian Jew who lives in New York. He's 90 years old, a millionaire, and sometimes he is involving in politics, saying that the refugees should be treated in a different way. And the only text which is under the photo of Soros is, "Don't let him laugh at the end." So we should laugh about him, and he shouldn't be happy about anything. They are not mentioning that he is a Jew, but it is clear that he is the person who is carrying all the guilt. Practically, there are two topical persons. One is called Soros, Brussels. Don't let them laugh at the end. Soros and Brussels. Brussels, of course, is the capital of Belgium, and one of the capitals of the European Union. But although Hungary is receiving a lot of benefit from the European institutions, it is still declared to be an enemy. What I might add is that there is this statue which they wanted to inaugurate in Budapest capital, in Freedom Square, where there is a Russian monument also. And there were continuous protests against the inauguration of this state monument, which they were able to avoid this. So the inauguration of the monument was not taking place, but there is the monument, which is saying that the Germans are the guilty and nobody else. But immediately when the German army invaded Hungary, the Hungarian gendarmerie collected the Jews, and they collected practically this more than 500,000 Jews which were taken to Auschwitz. So the Hungarian rail system, the Hungarian authoritarian system was fully guilty in our Holocaust during 1944 and 1945. So this was my short contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, Is there anybody else? I must say I'm very, yeah, okay, Oksana.
Thank you. Actually, well, first I would like to thank both Dovid and you, Tord, because I do feel that it's not just interesting, but very timely. So it's necessary. Actually, we should have started to speak about all these things, not today, but a year ago or even more time. Much more time ago. But I would like to draw your attention to the link which I've sent in the chat box. And actually, this is a petition calling to support, actually calling to help their Riga Holocaust Museum, Riga Ghetto and Holocaust Museum, which is now being threatened with closure under purely bureaucratic or financial reasons, which in my view is kind of pretext to a lot more deeper problem. I've just received some positive news, some update to this petition, saying that the preliminary decision has been taken to keep their non-paid status for the museum, but it should be still endorsed by the Riga Council. I would really appreciate if you pay your attention to this petition and support this particular museum, because in my view, I've been there many times and I've published several articles about different types of work the museum carries out. It's very peculiar because it doesn't complicate, it doesn't simplify a very complicated history. And it speaks about history using facts. And if, for instance, there were people from Austria, Austrian Jews, who were granted asylum by Latvia in 1939, and whose fate went different way. One of them was sent to Siberia, where he survived and returned to Austria. The other one stayed in Latvia and was executed in 1941. So, and this museum gives these kind of facts the way they are. So, so there's in the current circumstances, it's not very convenient to have this kind of museum in Riga. So, I hope that the museum will survive, and not just survive, but Shamir Association, Rabbi Menachem Barkan, and all the people who are working for this marvelous museum will be provided a chance to make it more visible. So I really appreciate if you sent out this petition and support the Museum of Riga Ghetto and Holocaust.
Thank you, Oksana. Yeah, I don't understand this, because I do understand that there are the politicians have their sort of ways, which Dovid described very well. But there's a this issue of being against antisemitism is really big and well organized in Sweden and many other countries. But why are they not interested in this? That's sort of, and you must have felt very frustrated, Dovid. I cannot explain it in many other words, that one of the sources that ought to have been acting earlier would be left parliamentarian parties and the Greens, actually. But for some reason, they are super afraid of being linked to Stalinism. And it's because they are so state-centric. When I discuss this in the environmental movement, I see nobody reacts against it when I'm saying that, of course, we have to accept that peasants and workers were doing the revolution. How can we say to the Finnish small peasants and workers that you shouldn't have done anything? Because what they did, of course, it became very oppressive in Soviet Union. But where did our welfare state come from? Everybody knows it. People were afraid of a Russian revolution. That's why we were allowed to have voting rights finally in Sweden and so on. So it's not hard to explain why we need to stop this thing. But for some reason, these parties, they're so afraid, in spite of that it's dangerous for themselves. We will soon start trying to end up. I would really like, I will give Matthias the word because you have raised your hand, but I really would like to have some comments from some of the young participants as well. It would be very nice to hear what you think about this. Okay, Matthias?
I wanna talk about one issue, it is the Red Star. Not only the hammer and sickle is prohibited and put on the same level as swastika, but the Red Star itself. Here in Hungary, one of our friend and comrade, Attila Vainai, was the one who was wearing the Red Star during demonstrations. And he was immediately captured by the police, you know, and were put into investigation, and then there was a criminal court about it. So to cut it short, it took about 5 years for Attila to get the decision in Strasbourg that the Red Star can be worn on occasions which is connected to the workers' movement. For instance, in 1st of May or in such occasions. So not only the symbol of hammer and sickle, but the Red Star is dangerous here. So if there is no workers' movement, things like May Day, then you cannot wear the Red Star. That's so simple. So if I put a Red Star on my cap, it's prohibited. So in Hungary, this type of rewriting history is really vivid and very strong. And I don't know the other countries like Lithuania and Latvia and all the Baltic states, but I have some experience in Ukraine. But I don't know what is the situation in the other so-called ex-socialist countries. But I do think that the similarity is very, very visible in the case of Poland and Hungary. So this is my contribution to this discussion, that here in Hungary, the Red Star is a dangerous thing.
I urge everyone to read defendinghistory.com, because there is continuous analysis, news in detail on much of what you're talking about, Matthias. And I'm quite for sure that Dovid and his team would like to have more contributions. But I think what Oksana raised here is actually that this is it's accelerating the problem. We should have started a long time ago, yeah, and it's getting worse. In Ukraine, the courts have decided that C14, which is one of the worst violent Nazi groups existing in the world, and is violent in Ukraine as well, you're not allowed to say that they are neo-Nazis. And this is supported by Stop Fake, which is one of the biggest, most respected organizations against Russian disinformation. So it's sort of, it's really developing, and this European Parliament resolution and this war now escalating sort of. So this is really becoming an issue that would be important for many more. And I'm really seeing this question of character assassination, and that actually doors are closed for qualified careers. And it will hit all the movements. What we did in Sweden was simply to merge, make a very strong connection between environmental movement and peace movement. And the environment movement is super respected in Sweden, and the peace movement is shit. And this is really strengthening everybody, because it makes the environmental movement a little bit more radical, and it makes it much easier for the peace movement. And these things that we are addressing here now would be very important. So but I'm really interested if Chiara or Tatiana or Neringa or Jenny or Nelly have some comment or some question to add to our discussion. And Tsu, I don't know who Tsu is, but they were the young ones that I could identify. Neringa, you're not so afraid, I know. They're maybe not there anymore, you know, you put on the... Well. Anybody else? Oh, there is Dagmar. Dagmar, you maybe could have something to say, because as you see, this really asks for some institutional strength in this.
Well, I'm not an expert on the issue. I just want to support you in what you're doing. I was putting a couple of information to the chat window, so you may have realized that Transform Europe has been or is deeply interested into this topic. We have released firstly in reaction to the European Parliament resolution this position paper which was supported widely across Europe by the academics. We also are following the topic on the revisionism, rewriting the history, on fight against the far right. So, I mean, they are my colleagues who are focusing entirely on the issue. So it's not me who is the expert on this, but we have multiple programs or project across the Europe dealing with the problem of the rising of the far right, of the history remembrance, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I would just invite everyone also to check our website, and I believe that we will be in some kind of dialogue in this point in the future. Otherwise, I just would like to take the opportunity to thank you for the presentation. I would also like, if that would be possible, to have both presentation available for all the participants, because I think it would be worth to revisit these. And I'm just looking forward to other action and exchanges. So just very briefly from me, I will turn my video again off because I have a little bit weak signal, but I am still following you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dagmar. We have to wind up. I see that Vera has raised her hand. I also see that Nelly has been writing here in the chat. That is a very useful way to communicate, and think it was very informative. She's part of this no hate network. So I think there are some really good possibilities if we maybe could have, it was really too fast planning. But it was tested because we have felt like Oksana, this should have been done a long time ago. But now we did it, and it was a starting point. So I hope we can sort of find each other better now. It's nice to see. Neringa is from Lithuania, Dovid. So there are connections here, and So let's hope for that we can find another occasion which we plan much better ahead. And maybe also not only a webinar, but also some kind of process somehow that can build some strength. I was not able to reach out to UK, which I think would have been very important. Stop the War campaign, etc. They ought to be very interested in these kind of discussions. I suppose you, Dovid, know better that you have some links to UK and so on. But and better maybe be able to also have cooperation with the International Peace Bureau, etc. So thank you, everybody. And I think we could leave the last word to Vera, because I have this idea that there's always more to say, but it's better to stop in the time that which was planned. Did you want to say something, Leo, as well, or is it your old raised hand that is still there?
Is it a question to me, or sorry?
No, to Leo.
Sorry.
It is the old hand.
Okay. So then, and if you, Nelly, would like to say something, it would be very nice also. You want to say something, Nelly?
Yes, very briefly. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Again, I wrote, but now I have to say it here, because to be honest, I learned lots of things that I didn't know, and there are lots of documents and information I still need to check just to get more acquainted to all these things. What I also wanted to ask you, Tor, maybe later, would be nice to share this petition that we made jointly. Because, yeah, we have people who are like-minded people, and it would be nice to involve as much as it is possible. Another question was about sharing the presentations, if it's possible, if not, still okay, because personally, me, I was taking some screenshot with your permission. And yes, in case of possibility, we still can exchange our contacts, because I am planning, it's not finalized, but I am planning also to organize an event about the current war in Nagorno-Karabakh, what is going on here and so on. And for the people who are interested about making an online meeting or later on a joint movement to make a peace, not war topic, maybe we can have a meeting and see what are the lessons we learn from the history. Because so many things are repeated, and we see that time is changed, technology is changed, but many things are going on the same way with the same interest and based on the same narratives. So this is what I wanted to inform everybody who is here. Maybe later on we can also send the information if people are interested to participate in a meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nelly. It's very interesting that this is useful for Armenia, and I mean the situation is in many ways different, I suppose, but also very similar. And I think there's too little experience exchange on these kind of things where history, the writing of history becomes very current, a very political tool, sort of how we can manage that. So I'm very grateful that it was that it was relevant for you as well. I see that we have two people who would like to say, because I think you would like to say something, Oksana, as well.
Yeah,
but
wait, just
well,
very brief.
Vera is first.
Okay.
Okay, Vera.
Okay, so I thank very much the two sayings of the two presentations. They were very interesting, and I must say that all these problems are daily problems of our life, unfortunately. So we are living together with these problems, and we really must raise our voices and protest because of this. And I think once upon a time we can do such a Zoom conference about the topic of anti-communism, because it's also interesting, because after 1989 revolt, it was almost obligatory to be anti-communist in the Eastern Bloc, and let's talk about it, what is the case now 30 years after. and in the Horan Island, two historian professors gave presentations about the rewriting of the history, and we are trying to write down, subscribe the English version so we can share it with you. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Vera. Then I think we can give the last word to Oksana, but I will shortly mention who you are, because many here now are from the Prague Spring 2 network, and we've been very much involved in Ukraine, as you know, but I don't think anyone you have met actually. But Oksana is the person I know from the Nordic country that has done much more than anybody else, humanitarian, politically, etc., with the help of Finnish friends. And she has an excellent Facebook group now called Peace in Ukraine, with a lot of English text, which is very useful because it's humanitarian, tries to be as unbiased as possible, etc. Precisely the way we have been trying to work as well. So if we can come a little bit more together towards, for instance, Agesta next year and so on, and maybe then better cooperation also between the movements, wider movements in the country would be very great. So it's fantastic. And now with this Southern Caucasus thing as well, the problem is that I'm sort of too, there is, I will try to find it when Oksana speaks, there is a statement made by the Southern, concerning the Southern Caucasus, which could be useful to spread. So Oksana.
Yeah, well, Tord, thank you for your really nice words of recognition and appreciation, because this attempt to work on Ukraine is quite frustrating, as you can imagine. Also because of under evaluation of the danger of far right emerging in Ukraine and being consolidated because of Ukraine. But I would actually, I would like to give more information about some coming events. And Nelly, it might be very important for you to know, because actually the University of Tampere is planning to hold 2 online meetings, presentations, one on their ethnic conflicts inside Russia, and I'm going to speak there about the situation in Chechnya and the historical background of the conflict. Also from the point of view of how history very often used to marginalize or to demonize sides of the conflict in order to justify armed activities. But the other will be at some point in November, and it will be precisely on Nagorno-Karabakh issue, and I've been kind of involved into that, trying to contact people from Armenia and Azerbaijan who are more peace inclined than we might think of them. But so I would really like to hope that the information about these 2 events will be spread and they will find interest.
Thank you. That seems to be that it has been useful for connections, which is exactly what this is about. I'm not able to find the link to this call for peace in Southern Caucasus, but we will put it in the Facebook event in the discussions. And I don't know, most of you I have the email to, but I don't know who that is. I don't know if I have the email to that person, but the rest. So if Tsu could add his or her email, it would be useful. But I think it's very good that we now end up, and yeah, maybe we should have at least a little short version of some song. So, we shall overcome, we shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, glory, I do begin that we shall overcome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.